Well, hello. The demonstration that I'd like to perform for you today is how to make a slab plate. What I would like to outline for you to begin with is, because I know what it is I'm going to make, I've gathered up all the tools and materials that I know, or at least think I might be needing as I'm working on this particular project. Obviously, I have a block of clay that I'm going to work with, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. I have a knife. This is just a simple paring knife. You could use any style of knife that you might have in your kitchen. As a form of a pottery tool, you could also use something known as a fettling knife, which has a wooden handle and a long tapered blade. It's a very versatile tool if you happen to have one in your ceramic toolkit. For this particular, I'm just going to use a paring knife. I have a couple of wooden sticks. These wooden sticks used to be a meter stick. I cut that meter stick approximately in half so that I have two wooden sticks. The important part about the sticks that I have here are the thickness. The thickness of a meter stick in this case, and oftentimes a yardstick, the thickness is approximately 3/8 of an inch thick. And the thickness of this stick, of these particular sticks, happens to provide us with a relatively ideal thickness when we're working with slabs, in that as long as we use the stick on each side of our rolling pin, we're not going to get our slab too thin and make it too delicate to work with. So I have two pieces of stick there. Anything that's the same thickness, you just need an equal number of. And this is what we're going to use in a little bit. I have here a rolling pin. This is a particular rolling pin that is made for working with clay. Unlike your rolling pin that you might have at home in your kitchen, this rolling pin is solid. There is not a metal shaft that runs through it. So as you'll see as I roll this over the slab of clay to thin it out, you'll see clearly that this particular rolling pin, I need to allow the handle to glide through my hands. I can't hold it firmly and roll. I need to allow it to flow through my hand. The whole thing moves. There's no metal shaft. What I also have here is, for this particular piece, I'm going to use this styrofoam form as a mold, if you will, for my slab plate. I'm going to roll out my slab of clay in a rectangular shape that approximates the size of this particular form, and then when I'm done rolling it out and I've textured it a little bit, I'll talk about that, I can lay that slab into the form, and thus I will create, using the form, I'll create a shallow plate that I can, it's an easy mold. I like using an easy mold, simplify the process. And then I have a piece of lace that I'm going to incorporate here for some texture on the surface of my plate. So, as I'm getting ready to begin, I'm going to set my tools aside, anything that I don't need just yet. So what I need here is I need to place my meter sticks, my sticks, in appropriate spacing so that I can work with my block of clay. My slab is going to become a slab of clay. Remember, I need to work rectangular, so I'm going to roll mostly in one direction as I roll this out. So obviously the size of the plate that you desire in the end is going to determine how thick of a block of clay you start with. And you can see I'm gently applying some downward pressure to roll this out. I'm turning my block of clay periodically so that I even out the stress or the pressure on both sides of the clay. If you were to use a luxury device, so to speak, such as a slab roller, there are two rollers that the clay passes through, and that provides an equal amount of pressure or stress on the clay as it passes back and forth. That's in a whole other video. With this particular method, you need to flip your slab, your block of clay, so that it evens out. And you can see as I'm rolling this, that I'm allowing the rolling pin to gently glide between my hands, glide through my thumb. Okay, and I'm going to spread those sticks out a little bit. And there you can see that it's rolling out nicely. Now, I'm going to take a little bit here and I'm going to stretch this a little bit wider just by throwing my slab of clay from the sides gently. I'm stretching it out a little bit more this way, and that is another method of making slabs, is you can just throw the clay gently at an angle to stretch it. So now here I'm basically going to roll this through and kind of give it a final. Now, also too, if you keep in mind, this particular surface, my work surface is a canvas board, a piece of wood covered with a piece of canvas. Clay, generally speaking, does not stick to canvas. It also does not stick to an unpainted wood surface. Clay will stick to a painted surface or a plastic or metal or glass surface, however. So you want to make sure that your work surface has something that you can pick up the clay from. You'll notice that with the canvas that on the bottom side of my clay, I'm getting a little bit of canvas texture, whereas on the top side of the clay, wherever I'm rolling, I get that nice smooth surface. So there I have that. Now, you can see that the meter stick has provided me with something that is, the clay is meter stick thick. If I did not have those meter sticks in place, I could roll all the way down to the depth of the canvas board, and that's not what I want to do. I want to ensure myself that I have the desired thickness, in this case, meter stick thick. This is really important, okay? I want to make sure that my slab is meter stick thick. Now that I'm done rolling my slab of clay, I'm going to set my rolling pin aside and get that out of my way, as I don't need that anymore. I'm going to bring in, I'm not ready to texture just yet, but I'm going to bring in my mold. And I can see that this piece of clay doesn't quite fit the depth of the mold that I need. So I'm going to take a look for another mold. And I found one a little bit smaller. That'll work. You can see the difference in size between the two. So my piece of clay will fit much nicer within this particular mold. So I can actually, if I lay that on there, I see that I have some excess. I'm going to work where I know I have extra clay at. And just from a standpoint of not wanting to work with a whole lot of extra clay, I'm now going to use my knife and I'm going to trim away what I know is extra and what might otherwise just cause me some difficulty when I'm working, when I'm creating, when I'm laying my clay into the mold. Now I could actually trim that right up against there, and then I know that I have the edge that I want. The rim of my platter, in this case, my plate, is going to be down inside the mold. But by doing so, just by trimming it up against, I'm giving myself a much more uniform rim. Okay, and I'm getting rid of the clay that is otherwise just going to be excess. And now I've trimmed that around, and now I know that that is the size of my platter. That's what it's going to be. So I'm going to set that aside for a moment. All of this clay, that just becomes scrap, so I'm going to save that in case I want to use it for something a little bit later on. So, back here now. Let's have a little bit of texture on the inside, and what I like to think about doing is, if I use the whole piece of lace, it becomes very obvious. What I like to use here, so I'm going to alternate this, I'm going to incorporate the use of what I call as a pony roller. It has a small curved rolling pin, and a larger flat rolling pin. I'm going to use a gentle amount of pressure, and I'm going to gently roll back and forth. Now, this type of texture is not necessary. This is just something that I'm doing to illustrate to you how easy it is to apply a little bit of texture to dress up a slab a little bit, in this case a slab plate, okay, what might otherwise become a little serving platter. So I'm dressing that up a little bit, and I can take and put a little bit over here as well. You don't want to think about using the entire piece of lace, okay? It becomes very obvious then that that's what your intent was, and you might want to vary it a little bit. So you can see here, just by changing it up a little bit, I'm going to end up with a little bit of a pattern inside the center of my platter that I'm going to leave untextured, and that's going to give my plate a nice visual appearance. At least I think so. Alright, so there I've created, and I have a nice little pattern on the inside, and that's alright. So I'm going to put my texture aside, and my pony roller aside, and now, this is styrofoam. Clay will not stick to styrofoam. So now what I can do is I've formed everything, and at this point, I can take and gently pick up my slab, and I'm going to lay it gently into that mold, and I'm going to move it so that it's somewhat centered and it's spaced evenly. I want to make sure that I have about the same amount of clay all the way around. And now what's nice here with this styrofoam mold is I can gently drop my piece of clay, my textured slab, into that form, and you can see that it is gradually taking on the shape of that styrofoam mold. So now in essence I've created my form. What I would do next, the other things I would do is as my slab stiffens up a little bit, I would use, in this case I'm just using a finger. You can run your finger over this just to soften your edge and clean it up a little bit. It may have been a little bit rough from when you were cutting it with your knife, okay, and you can form it back over so it almost has a handle, or you can leave it kind of up in the air. But just gentle pressure, and that cleans that up nicely. So in that essence, I've now just made a slab plate, a slab platter, and I can force that down in a little bit to bring those corners up a little bit more. And I'm doing so gently because I don't want to remove, I don't want to obliterate any of that texture that I created. So what I could also do in the middle, if I wanted to, I could incorporate some stamps. Let's see if I have something here that's interesting. What might look nice with that? I don't want to go crazy, so I want to be very cautious as to what I'm using for a stamp on the inside of that. And I could think about, okay, here I have a little stamp that I can press in, and this has a fish on it. So I might take that fish, and I'm just going to gently press down, and I'm going to have some fish just kind of randomly. I'm going to smooth out that outer edge a little bit. I don't want the whole stamp on there. I want just the fish. And I'll go the other way. Do about the same thing. As long as the clay is fresh, you want to be very careful when you're pressing a stamp into the clay. You know, there I didn't get very much of it. I'm going to press that in a little bit more. You can always reveal a little bit and see if it worked for you. and then I go back and I'm smoothing out that little bit of outline from the stamp itself. Okay, so I've added a couple of fish in there. I can do a whole variety of other things. So that fish is kind of nice. Maybe I'll put a little bit more in there, put in a couple of more fish. You'll just have to decide what it is that you like for texture and what it is that fits your desires or your need for any particular piece that you might be making. What I'm also going to keep in mind is, since I'm adding some texture, I want to keep in mind, what am I going to use to glaze the surface of this plate, this slab plate, with? We'll talk more about that in another video, but I want to keep in mind, if I'm adding all this beautiful texture, I don't want to put on an opaque glaze or really thick glaze that's going to cover up the texture that I've worked so hard to apply. I want to be able to use a glaze that's going to show and highlight or enhance that texture that I created with a little stamp and a little bit of lace. So there you can see that. This in essence is a slab plate. I'll just bag this so it dries slowly, and then later on we'll address in another video, we'll take a look at adding feet. In another video, we'll take a look at adding feet to the bottom so that we can elevate it a little bit. But that, in essence, is a slab plate. Thanks for watching.